Good morning, everybody. I apologize for the microphone. I don't have a lower volume. I only talk in teacher voice. So yeah, our camera guy in the back is already freaking out over my blowing his eardrums. So a little bit about me and about what I do. Anthony jumped ahead a little bit. So let me talk about the Johnny Crayons thing. So a friend of mine, he teaches down in Cinnaminson, New Jersey, which is all the way like you throw a rock and you hit Philadelphia. That's how close he is. And he teaches with a fantastic history teacher. The guy is the king lecturer. You could watch him all day long and not be bored for a single second. But my friend does the flipped classroom, so there's not a lot of him talking on a regular basis in front of the classroom. It's a lot of his kids doing all the time. So this guy who's this fantastic lecturer comes over and he goes, "Oh my God, you and your Johnny Crayons thing need to figure this all out." And we're all like, "What?" And we realize what Johnny Crayons is. Johnny Crayons, you may have seen this bouncing around the internet. There is this picture of this kid with a crayon, and he's going like this, like as hard as possible, and it says, "I love coloring!" And it's like huge exclamation points. And we realize that's Johnny Crayons. Johnny Crayons is the guy, is the kid, is the woman, whoever, who is so into what they do on a regular basis, is so creative, is so out of the box, who is doing it differently, who just loves their day every single day, that's the way they color. They just color like mad, like this. And they just get their faces really into it. And so that's what we call the Johnny Crayons. It's our hashtag. So any one of us who are doing something creative in the classroom, who's trying something different, who's really proud of what they're doing, really excited, we hashtag it with JCrayons. And that's where the Johnny Crayons thing comes from. So. Now about me, I am not as conceited as my email address shows. What it is actually it's a backstory. There's a guy on the internet called Bill Selak. He's B Selak at Twitter on Twitter, and he started a website, and he realized he wanted to own his own URL. So he started the EduAwesome URL. And what he realized was he's not the only one doing educationally awesome things. We are all doing educationally awesome things. So he opened it up to the world to get your own educationally awesome email address. It forwards to my Gmail account, but when I do conferences like this, it's a fun email. Instead of just saying markseigel@gmail.com, it's a lot more fun to say markseigel@eduawesome, because I feel that I do educationally awesome things, so we might as well promote it. And then it pops up on his website every once in a while when we hashtag it. So you can, if your teachers are doing awesome things, you're taking pictures of it, tag it on Twitter with EduAwesome, and it'll appear on his website to record all the different educationally awesome things that you're doing. As Anthony said, I've been teaching 14 years. I'm sorry, I can't sit still. I'm Italian and Jewish, so I talk with my hands, and I can't stop moving all the time. So I love the fact that I've got so much room to work with up here because I won't hit anything. I've been teaching 14 years. I have a master's degree in educational administration. I was an administrator for a couple of years, director of curriculum and instruction. But I've never stopped teaching. I was a teaching supervisor, so I taught the whole time that I was doing the administrative stuff, which was very interesting. I am highly, highly, highly connected, as I apologize, Anthony, I was missing half of what you were saying as I was catching my kids tweeting during class about how much free time they have today. And so clearly we're not doing what they were supposed to be doing, so I caught them doing it. And then I was just in a series of tweets that were like, "Chem is awesome. We're doing everything we're supposed to be doing, Mr. Seigel. Don't worry, we're working hard, Mr. Seigel." There's a whole thing. So the kids forget that I can see what they do on Twitter. I follow my students, but only if they follow me first. I am very, very, very involved in social media because I think it's the way that the kids communicate with each other. And I think that's a lot of it. And because of that, because I do the flipped classroom, because my environment is not teacher-focused and teacher-centered, my kids are working all the time. They're working 24 hours a day sometimes. I mean, sometimes kids are doing work at home, sometimes they're doing it on the bus, sometimes they're doing it in class. I mean, you name it, they're doing it. Oh. This, by the way, just to let you know, is going for 59 hours. So I have about 59 more hours to talk. So there we go. I can fill it, don't worry. No, so what I want to do is I want to get you started with something a little bit digital, since I am a digital person. I want to use a poll everywhere with you, because I use poll everywhere in my classroom to get you started. So here's what I want you to do. If you have a digital device, it doesn't matter what you can do cell phone, you can do computers, it doesn't matter. If you, what I want to do is I want to generate some basically questions and topics to talk about as we go throughout this whole thing. So if you would do me a favor, pull out your phone And I want you to, in 3 words or less, describe what you know of as the flipped classroom. And if it's nothing, then say, I know nothing, because that's 3 words. You can text your message to 22333, and you just text 96497 and whatever you want to say to that number. You can tweet it, or you can go to pollev.com and you can tweet it out. So while that's popping up there, and this is a poll everywhere. Does anyone not know about Poll Everywhere? Everyone knows about Poll Everywhere? Sweet. You don't know about Poll Everywhere. Poll Everywhere, as you will see. Okay, so Poll Everywhere is a free program that you can get on the internet. And it's a great way for starter activities in your classroom. Great do-now activities. Throw a question up there and see what the kids know about that particular topic before you even start. So I'm going to find out, kids, what you know about the flipped classroom by doing this poll everywhere. And because the poll is live, as the messages come in, they will appear on the screen. This is embedded into my PowerPoint, so it has a PowerPoint slide that goes along with it. And you can just have it running. So you get your kids started. Your do now appears right at the top of the screen as you can do it. You can create as many different polls as you want. It is free. It allows up to 40 responses per free poll. So hopefully we'll have about 40 responses. Come on, people. There we go. Okay, that's what I'm looking for. So now you can see what's going to happen. So when you do it in a do now, it propagates itself, and you can scroll through it. Great way to check for understanding for homework. If you're using a video as instruction, and we'll talk about that later, it's a great way to find out what the kids got out of the video when you first come into the classroom. It gets the kids hands-on, it gets the kids doing something electronic, and it gets them using their personal electronic devices. These are not cell phones, people. I know I'm talking to a room full of mostly administrators. We need to understand that this is not a cell phone. This is a computer. This is about 1 million times more powerful than the first computer that I owned in 1980. Okay? And it contains, and I blow my kids' minds all the time with this. I asked my dad, because I didn't know back in 1980 how big my computer was. My first computer that my dad bought cost $2,000. It required its own desk because it was so large. It came in 4 different pieces, and it had 8K of memory. 8K! And the kids are like, yeah. And I'm like, that's 1 5-page essay. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yes. My wife was cleaning out our office, and she opened up a box and found a 3x5-inch disc. And we're like, wow, where's the Smithsonian? We got to call them and find out. Because we don't even have a device that we can find out what's on this disc. There's probably something important on it. So, yeah, so it blows kids' mind. And the fact that the tiny, tiny little card, SD card that's in this, has 8 gig on it in this phone, and that's 8 billion bytes of memory versus 8,000. It blows my mind because I've seen the trend of personal computing. So this is a personal electronic device. This can be used for anything. It can be used for learning. It can be used for texting. It can be used for Candy Crush Saga. It could be used for anything that the kids wanted to use for. But the point is, if you maximize it, if you leverage this device in the classroom, you get your kids learning 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So let's see what we've got up here. Okay, so good. We're already scrolling down. So we've got great interactive learning, active learning classroom, active participation. I like the active. Good. Classroom collaboration, rooming classroom boundaries, teacher-facilitated learning, student-centered classroom, flexible, timely, learning outside the classroom. So you can see, so this is the kind of thing that we do. Oops, sorry, I went too far. This is the type of thing, I want to scroll down because we lost a couple. Facilitated problem solving, teacher records lesson. Good, so this is fantastic. So you guys are in a very positive place with this. I get a little bit of everything sometimes when I come in for conferences to speak. So you can keep popping them up because they'll keep coming up there, and then I'm going to move to my next slide. So let's talk about all that positive, active stuff that you guys are putting up there. So here's the question that we kind of have to ask ourselves. Where are we as educators? And I found this picture online, and I really like this picture because when I look at this picture, that's a really beautiful classroom. Like, I would love to teach in a classroom that looked that beautiful. That is just fantastic. But there's something that I feel personally wrong with that classroom. Who's in charge of that classroom? How can you tell it's the teacher? Yeah, they're all facing one direction. Where does learning occur in that classroom? Wherever that blackboard is. Wherever that instructional location is, That's where learning is occurring. And I'll make bet that a lot of you might look at your classrooms, and I'll tell you, I teach with people who have fantastic classrooms that look like this. And I'm not saying a classroom like this isn't a great learning environment. It's just, it's where we are, and it's where we were. But it's not where the world is going. And I'll make bet that the software people and the Right Reason Technologies people in this room right now don't work in environments where all their desks are set up in a nice, neat, even rows, with all the cubicles are nicely aligned. And when I talk to people more and more often, they're working in environments that have no walls, that have no desks, that have no chairs, where the people can go wherever they want. Google, I love Google. I'll talk about Google nonstop. But I read the book In the Plex, which talks all about Google, their philosophy, their facilities, everything like that. But it's unbelievable how worker-focused they are and creating an environment that functions under anyone's design. Anyone. If you want a wall, you can put up a wall. If you want to take down your wall, they hand you a sledgehammer. Like they literally provide you the tools to create whatever learning environment they want, that you want to learn in. You want to have an exercise ball as a chair? They get you exercise balls. They don't care because they're trying to create the least restrictive environment for you to work in, the environment that you want to that you really want to come to work in every day. Here is where I feel education needs to go. Hands-on, in the field, quite literally in the field. Kids working together, kids problem solving, handing them an idea and saying, here, run with it. Or even better, I love this. When kids come to me, and I'm going to talk about this later, when they come to me with something and they say, can we do this? And I'm like, yeah, why not? And they're like, wait, what? Wait, we can do it? And I'm like, yeah. Why should I have to do everything in this classroom? The point is you have to do it. And one of the things the presentation model is, I have a hard time talking for an hour because I don't talk for this much time all day long. So it's kind of weird. But this is where we need to go as educators. Whenever we flip our classrooms, this is the question that we ask ourselves all the time. What is the best use of your face-to-face time with your students? There are some educators who absolutely, and they're fantastic, and I work with a lot of them, who the best place for their kids to learn is right there in front of them. My best face-to-face time is me in the front of the classroom instructing my students and giving them the knowledge that they need to have. The problem is we work with kids who don't know how to learn like that. And they go to school and we force them to learn from one person. And then they go home and they learn from the world. And then we come back to school. So it used to be that school was the place that education happened. And now, school is the place where teaching happens. Because I ask this all the time. I had a student, Dominique. Dominique is world class. If you give her a project, you're getting 120% of her energy. She is like the project queen. And it's always amazing. So they were doing this project in history about Africa. And she comes into class with this amazing African headdress, like with the whole outfit, and the whole thing. And I'm like, wow, that's absolutely amazing. Where did you buy that? And she says, actually, I went to a store and I bought the fabric, and I sewed the whole thing myself. And I went and I learned how to wrap the entire headdress and everything so I can dress the part. And I'm like, who taught you? And she goes, YouTube. She learned the whole thing. She learned where to find the fabric, she learned how to sew it, and she learned how to dress it. I'm like, you're kidding me. She's like, no, watch. She took the whole thing off and redid the entire thing right in front of me. So she just sat there and watched YouTube over and over and over again. She's learning from the world. There's no teacher that taught her that. But then we force her to learn from one person standing in front of the room. And this girl is going to do amazing things. One woman, she's a woman now, is going to do amazing things in this world because she does not think like we've always taught them to think. One of the biggest problems that I run into with my students is when we get into start doing this more and more throughout the year, is I actually have to untrain them. I have to break what they see as school and turn it into something that they see in my classroom. And literally, they sometimes flick a switch where they have to. We walk in the door, and I have to I'm like, turn it on. You guys got to bring your A game every day. I am not going to be telling you what to do. I'm not going to be forcing you to do something. You're going to have to do it your own way as you go through. So let's talk about where I started and where I am now. So a lot of us call the very beginning Flipped Classroom 101. This is what you guys have always heard. The teacher recorded lesson. Whatever you did in the classroom, the kids now watch on video at home, and when they come to class, they do the homework that they would have been doing at home. That's where I started. In 2010, I'm sorry, let me go back one more step. When I was doing my student teaching in 2000, I worked with a veteran teacher, and she's head of the department, and one day I'm teaching a lesson. Now, she was a nice person, but she wasn't a great cooperating teacher. She very often, once I took over, went home for the day, like just jumped in her car and left. And I'm not joking. I'm not like she went to the faculty room. I mean, literally, she got her oil changed. She'd get her dry cleaning. She'd go out to lunch with her husband. She was gone, non-existent. So it made me a very self-sufficient teacher from day one because I had to know everything. And the other guy I worked with, he couldn't do that because he rode his bike into work every day. But what he did is he started bringing a pillow, and he'd just go to sleep in the back room while I was teaching. And I say this, and you're like, no. And I'm like, yes. I wish there were cell phones back then so I could have taken pictures of the guy sleeping on the lab bench in the stock room, just out cold while I'm teaching. And kids were really like, is Mr. Blah, blah, blah here? And I don't even remember his name. Mr. Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I think he went to the bathroom, and they're trying to get in the back room. I'm like, no, don't go back there. So anyway, so the female teacher I was working with, she comes rushing into my class, interrupts my entire lesson, and goes, stop. What are you teaching right now? And I said, gas laws. And she's like, okay. She pulls a binder off the wall, flip, 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 scribbles out the date on the top from like 10 years earlier, writes in the new date, puts the binder back on the shelf, and says, the principal's coming around and checking lesson plans today. If he asks, there are your lesson plans. I'm like, okay, now I'm student teaching, so I had my lesson plans were flawless. They were good, they were in a binder, they were all set up on the desk, rated. Student teachers, like I was ready to go. So I'm like, okay, fine. But at that exact moment, as I got back into my lesson, which was clearly interrupted, I said to myself, if I ever do that, I either need to change radically or I need to retire on that moment. So in 2010, it was a Monday, I roll into school, and I'm like, what am I doing today? I go into my folder on my computer, I find the PowerPoint with whatever the date was for the day, change the date, typed in new, hit save, and went, oh my God. Okay. And it was like a switch flipped on that exact moment. I threw out my entire plan for the day, made something else up on the fly, and it just so happened, right about that time, I see this article in the Science Teacher magazine from John Bergman and Aaron Sands, who are the two kind of like flipped classroom leader people, about the flipped classroom and about how they were using videos for instruction. And I said, I so can do that. I had already started doing that with my students. I would record videos of individual example problems that I was doing and posting to my website. Now, when I was doing it bizarre. I literally took a video camera, put it in front of the computer screen, and it recorded the computer screen, and then I dubbed in my voice later because I didn't have any video editing software. And this is 2006. So I see them, and I'm like, I could totally do that. Run to my supervisor. He gives me approval, and bam, I get started in the fall of 2010. I did this. I took my homeworks, put them in class, took the videos, put them on lecture, sent them home. Boom. Good to go. We get started. It's amazing. It's like the greatest days ever. We're plowing through. Kids are learning. They're applying. We're doing labs. It's fantastic. I'm like, teacher of the year. Woo! And then 2 months later, we hit a brick wall. And that's where we got to. It was the same. I couldn't figure out what day of the week it was. And that's how I know over the summer that my vacation has been too long, because when I start to lose track of what day of the week it is, I need to go back to work. I need to start working again. My wife, it takes like 3 weeks to happen over the summer, and that's where it goes. My wife's like, you've lost what day it is. I'm like, yep, it's time to start working again. So that's how I knew this ended up being like a vacation more than it was in a new instruction. Because what was happening was, it didn't matter what day of the week. It was exactly the same. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, kids would come in, they would do homework, I'd help them, they'd go home, they'd watch the videos, we'd come back, every day, lather, rinse, repeat, no change. Something had to give. And I had parents writing me going, thank you. I had a student who is this world-class soccer player. He was being recruited by all sorts of different colleges. He was a sophomore. And his mom emails me and said, thank you. Thank you for doing the flipped classroom. My son was able to watch TV for the first time in 6 months because between his schoolwork and his soccer, he never had a chance he had no free time. And he got to watch 30 minutes of TV one night because of the way my classroom was structured. It gave the kids more free time outside of class because, believe it or not, a 45-minute lesson is not a 45-minute podcast. It's about a 12-minute podcast because there's a lot of wait time. There's a lot of question answering. There's a lot of pause. There's a lot of garbage that you fill a lesson with that we don't realize. So I ended up freeing up time for these kids. But my problem was my kids weren't getting anything out of the class. All they were doing is going through the exact same thing that I would have done if I was in the room. And I was controlling everything. I told them on Monday, you got to do this. By Friday, you have to do this. I controlled every single day of this classroom. It wasn't getting anywhere, and it was boring. And I apologize. I'm going to skip this video, but we have more than enough time to it. So I had to change. And the reason I had to change was because, this actually happened 2 weeks ago. I have two little boys, a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. And my 6-year-old comes up to me and goes, Daddy, I thought you teach chemistry. And I said, I do. He's like, well, that's math. And I looked at it and I went, and this is the answer key I was using to grade assignments. And I looked at it and I said, yeah, sometimes chemistry and math looks the same. But it was kind of like, it was perfect timing for this presentation because I looked at this and I said, if I didn't create this, I'd have no clue what this meant. And he didn't know what it meant. Now, here's the thing for the kids, and you've probably done the same thing. How many times have you taken notes on something like math and science, and you go home, and that's what you see when you get back, and you try to study from that? And it's an impossibility. Because you look at that and go, cool, you got the right answers because they're all boxed off, but what does all that mean? What are the J's? Why did he write this units? What did this even come from? There's no connection to this material. And that's where the flipped classroom worked out really well because now the kids were doing this in class, and they'd go home, and the podcast would explain this whole process, and they could link the two things together. So it was like a flip. But when I looked at it from my son's perspective, I said, this is why we can't keep teaching the same way we do, because we go home, we send the kids home with this assignment here, and they come back and they I don't get it. Your math teachers complain about this all the time. My math teacher friends are like, I go over all these notes. We go through it. The kids can do it every single time. They go home, they do the homework, they come back and they fail the test. How is that possible? If they're getting A's on the homework, they're doing the notes, and they fail the test. We're not making the connections for the kids. And my son reinforced this for me, this is not what my classroom looks like anymore. My classroom is not filled with numbers and letters and all this stuff. My classroom is filled with, I'm sorry, I hope I didn't do something wrong. My classroom is filled with this. Because the beauty of the flipped classroom is, I apologize, I stand in your way all the time. The beauty of the flipped classroom is you have to create a flexible learning environment for these kids. These are my students. I do my best when I take pictures to try and not get students' faces, but Lily and Gabby on the right corner there, they gave me permission to use them in my presentation. But my students are doing this stuff every day. There's collaboration, there's flexible environments. When we do labs, all of our labs are Google Docs, so everything is done paperless. The only paper that's in our lab is a paper towel. That's it. I don't allow any other paper to go in there. You can see the computers in the back, so every file that they have is shared with them from the beginning of school. We are a Google Apps for Education district, so every student has an email address, has a Google account, every teacher. So we do everything by Google. So I'm receiving Google emails from my students and tweets as they are finishing their assignments and working on them right now. We record. Nothing is recorded on paper. Everything is recorded digitally. So they write things down, using neon expo markers directly onto the lab bench, and then they take pictures of them and upload those pictures to whatever document they're working on. When we do assignments, they're sitting in bungee chairs, and it's going to sound ridiculous, but yes, I still have, and I have pictures for it. You can see I have the very traditional desks in the background. All my desks are pods. We don't use rows. And the pods are facing in all different directions. There's about 4 desks in the entire room that face the front. Everything else faces each other. Because I don't control the classroom every day. I create an environment that allows the students to learn however they will learn. Christina, in the upper left-hand corner, has a auditory problem. She can't hear real well out of her left ear. It's not in her IEP. All it says is that she has processing issues. I had to talk to Christina about what's going on. So she gets preferential seating. No one said, don't put her on your right side, because she can't hear out of her left ear. So I have to move her around. So she sits wherever she wants to sit to make sure that she can understand what's going on. Sometimes she breaks herself off and goes into a corner. She learns really well with music. Believe it or not, despite the fact that she has a hard time hearing, music kind of like focuses everything for her. So she has her earbuds in all the time. My students do everything. I wanted to bring them so you could bring one so you could understand. My students do everything on whiteboard. I apologize, camera, because I'm walking off camera now. I forgot. Students do everything on a whiteboard. You know those whiteboards you can buy from like School Specialty and WB Mason that are like 1 inch by 1 inch and they cost $35 a piece, and you have to have a classroom set of 24, and your teacher's like, okay, cool, if I spend my budget for the next 6 years, I can get 1 classroom set? $13, and I got 24 of these from Home Depot. They come as gigantic panel boards, and you just have Home Depot cut them for you to 16 by 24 inch pieces. This is the size of a desk. All my students work on these. Okay? It's amazing how much more the students remember when you don't put things on paper and you let them do things electronically and think outside the box. So sometimes the whiteboards, and this is my scrap whiteboard. This is the one I travels with. My whiteboards at school, I have a serious obsession with neon green. Let's see. My business cards match my shirt and tie. So yes, I have a serious obsession with neon green. So all my boards have neon green around the edges, and they're protected, and that they use them as desks. They use them as their homework stations. They can do things in piecemeal. How many of your teachers give an assignment and say, okay, the assignment's due on Friday, and they collect 80 different assignments. They collect 80 kids' worth of assignments on Friday, and they go home pulling the cart. You have the math, especially my math and English teachers. They pull the cart. There are 2 things that were terrible for education. The first one was wheelie backpacks. Damn the guy who invented the wheelie backpack. Kills me. The kids are like, well, why is that such a big deal? I'm like, the town I live in is Piscataway, which is where Rutgers University is. They've actually outlawed wheelie backpacks. You are not allowed to use the bus if you have a wheelie backpack, because 2 years ago, they had a 3rd grader fall off the bus with his wheelie backpack, because as he's going up the stairs, he went like this, straight backwards, and landed on his back and his head. And so they've outlawed it in the district. You cannot have, kindergartners and 1st graders are not allowed to have backpacks. I'm like, I love this. My son's in 1st grade, and he's like, and these kids come in with these things, and the teacher makes them leave in the hallway. They're not allowed to bring them in, and they're not allowed to send home books. There's no books allowed in 1st, so they bring home only individual pieces of paper. So to keep the kids going like this, I forgot, I digress why I was doing it. Oh yeah, so the wheelie bags for teachers, that little thing, my wife got one for scrapbooking, and then she started using one for education, and she carries home her stack of stuff. Why? When I go home, this is what I bring. My computer. Because all 153 of my students' work fits on to Google Drive. When my students do work on the whiteboards, like Anthony was doing up there, that's my AP. That's AP work. AP has a lot more problem sets than my other classes do. But my AP class does it all on a whiteboard. If they get halfway through the problem, this is my big thing, organization. Parents come into me and say, oh my God, my kid is so unorganized. Can you please give him a binder, a folder, or something to keep everything track of? I'm like, does he have a phone? They're like, yeah. I'm like, okay, cool, we're good. And they're like, why? And I said, well, if he does it on the whiteboard and he only gets halfway through a problem, he snaps a picture of it. Or if he's a multiple problem set, he takes a picture of whatever he's done. I grade it up until that point, record the grade, and then he has it on his phone for the next time he's going to do something. So everything is done piecemeal. So this is a picture I took because Anthony finished this problem right at the end of the period. And I had another class coming in, and I couldn't grade it, and I needed the whiteboard. So I snapped a picture of it, graded it using my phone, and emailed the picture to Anthony to make sure that he knew what his grade was. okay? And I can indicate on the picture using editors where he lost points, which he didn't because he got a 10 out of 10. So Anthony's a very good student. AP, come on, they're always good students. But the point was, I have to meet the students wherever they need to be, and that's what my flipped classroom allows me to go. Okay, we only have 59 hours and 30 minutes left, so we're good. Go. One of the things I discovered over the summer is a website called Vens, and I apologize. If you have questions, please interrupt me. I don't like talking for long stretches at a time, so feel free to interrupt me at any point and ask questions. One of the websites I discovered over the summer is a website called venspired.com. I cannot think of the woman's name. She's fantastic. She's an elementary school teacher, and she takes all the awesome things that she sees on the internet and turns them into posters, turns them into pictures. And you can download the pictures for free from her website in high-quality resolution and print them out. So these are 3 posters that hang in my classroom. And I think they really represent well what my students do on a regular basis. And what I love is the one in the right-hand. I love them all. I love all my posters. I have a very beautiful room, which I've made myself. It used to be a white box. I have an interior classroom. I have no windows. So I used to be a white walls all the way around, and I have these 2 very large columns in my classroom. One is white and one is blue, and they block everything. I have obstructed view seating, so I always apologize to kids because I always have a desk that has to sit behind the pole because otherwise they'd be sitting in the lab area. So the kid can't see me. The kid physically has to move anytime I walk around, and I walk around all the time. But I had a student come to me like second week of school, and I gave them an assignment to do. And he's working through it, and he goes, Mr. Seigel, can't you just tell me what the procedure is? It's like, it would be so much easier if you just told me what to do, and then I don't have to do all this other stuff. And I'm like, dude. And I just point to the sign. And we don't do easy here. And a lot of my kids work really, really hard. And a lot of my colleagues are like, you don't do anything. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, this is why I drink. Like, this is a daily thing for me. And it has nothing to do with how I am now. I need caffeine. My classroom is, as one of my colleagues put it, a chaotic fury of learning. And I'm like, I love that. I should have that tattooed somewhere. Chaotic fury of learning. Because it's loud, it's obnoxious, there are 1,000 things going on in any one moment in the classroom, and yet every kid is working all period. I shouldn't say every kid. The kids are working all period long. 80-minute blocks of time, I have to fill it. So that's why the Twitter thing was funny, because the plan that I left them today very easily should have taken about 70 minutes, and 20 minutes left in the period, they're tweeting out, sweet, 20 minutes left in class to do nothing. And I'm like, say what? That means you're not working properly. That means you took the easy way out. And I never let my students take the easy way out. I hand them back assignments, perfect papers, and I said, you did this the easy way. I want you to find a harder way to do this. Come up with a better result. Come up with a better solution. This is too straightforward. Hold on a second. I'm big on modeling my test questions. So we have district-wide exams. We have 2 high schools in our district. And the exams for chemistry, we're moving to quarterly assessments instead of midterms and exams. Now, for any of you not familiar with the quarterly process, let me break it down for you. Take your midterm, split it in half, and instead of being 2 hours of testing, make it 2 one-hour tests. Add to it a day of review prior to each test, and eliminate all other work that can occur for that week, and quote-unquote, that saves time in the classroom. And I broke it down for my administrator. I'm like, you realize that you lie, right? And he goes, what are you talking about? And I broke it down minute-wise. And we've lost 12 days this year by moving to quarterlies. 12 days. And they're like, well, you should not be reviewing that much. Your kids should know it. I'm like, sure. Yeah, that's right. I'm going to give them a test that represents 20% of their grade and not review. Yeah, because I love parent complaints. That's my favorite part of my job, is dealing with parent complaints. So anyway, one of our quarterly questions is what's called a separation of a mixture. They're given a mixture of iron, salt, and sand in the question. They have to write a procedure for identifying how to break down the sand, salt, and iron. So I said, okay, that sounds easy enough. I went and got sand, salt, and iron, made a mixture of it, put the whole thing together, handed the tube to the kids, and I said, here, come up with a procedure. And they're like, well, where do we start? And I said, I don't know. How do you get it out of the test tube to start with? I'm like, start with the basics. So Some kids come up with it out of their own brain. Some kids Google it. My favorite one was the kid who handed me a procedure that he Googled. And I look at it and I said, "You didn't read this, did you?" And he goes, "No, it's perfect. It has sand, salt, and iron in it. I Googled that. Separation of a mixture with sand, salt, and iron. It has to be right." I said, "Absolutely, except this one has poppy seeds. And we don't have poppy seeds. So what the hell are you giving me here?" He never bothered to read it. And that's part of the reason we have to teach kids how to use the internet better. But that's part of my classroom is when they go out there, he Googled it and he came up with an idea, but it had no connection to the actual classroom. But my point is, it's not just the simplest response they could come up with. And I came up with some great ones. I mean, I had kids wrapping magnets with saran wrap because if you've never tried, iron filings are really, really, really small, and they stick to everything. So when you brush them off a magnet, they basically fall off the magnet and go right back on, and it's hilarious to watch the kids. It's like definition of insanity right there, and they're going like this, and they're scraping it, and it's falling down and jumping back up, and I'm laughing hysterically as it's happening. And I can't take a picture because the filings are so small. But I'm laughing at them doing this, and I had a kid go, "Mr. Seigel, could I wrap the magnet so that the iron sticks to the magnet, and sticks to the wrapping instead of the magnet?" And I said, "Yeah, but how will you get it off the saran wrap?" And they're like, "Well, if I take the magnet and I open up the saran wrap and my partner holds the magnet and I pull the saran wrap up and I pull the magnet away, I'll have a little bag of saran wrap with all my iron in it." And I'm like, that was pretty stinking ingenious right there. And you see the kids come up with these brilliant solutions for these kinds of things. I had another kid who said, part of the separation of a mixture is you have to dissolve it with water to get the salt away from the sand, because it's physically impossible to get salt and sand to separate from each other unless you have a really, really good pair of tweezers. So, and about 60 hours to work with, yeah. So you you put the whole thing with water, and the salt dissolves with the water, and then you end up with salt water and wet sand. And you have to evaporate off the water, so you have to heat it. And the kid's like, "I don't have to heat mine, Mr. Seigel." I'm like, "You got to explain this one, because the only way I can think of to do it is to heat it." And he goes, "If I weigh the water in advance, and I know the exact amount of weight of the water in advance, and I weigh my salt and sand mixture before I put it in the salt water, and I separate the two things out, and I get as much water out of the sand as possible, and I weigh it after, I can subtract the weight of the water and figure out how much salt is in the salt water and how much sand is in the wet." And I'm like, holy crap, that was awesome. It had major flaws, but but it was awesome because he didn't factor in the fact that the filter paper would absorb the water and a bunch of other stuff. But it was that was a really ingenious response, and I'm more likely to give that kid an A because he came up with this amazingly awesome idea of how to do this thing all off the top of his head. So anyway, okay. So I'm more than halfway through. I'm a little bit behind, so I apologize, Anthony. I'm going to run a little over. So I do want to show these too. So one of the things that came up there on your idea of what goes on in a flipped classroom is flipped classroom involves instructional videos done at home. Does that happen? Absolutely. What should be in those videos? The lowest level of Bloom's taxonomy, because that's what a lecture really is. Because anyone who comes in there and says, "I make my kids evaluate and analyze and create in my lectures," is full of crap. They wrote really good objectives, but it ain't happening, because you can't get a kid to analyze when you're doing all the talking. So, but the thing about the instructional videos is they don't have to come from you, and they don't have to be instructional. So here are two examples. How many of you know about the TED Ed website? ed.ted.com. Fantastic. Okay, if you haven't learned about ed.ted.com, go to ed.ted.com. I'm going to give you an example of what they did. But what this is, actually, I'll show the clip.
Little tiny things called atoms. You might even know that each atom is made up of even smaller particles called protons, neutrons, and electrons. And you've probably heard that atoms are small. But I'll bet you haven't ever thought about how small atoms really are. Well, the answer is that they are really, really, really small. So you ask, just how small are atoms? Well, to understand this, let's ask this question. How many atoms are in a grapefruit? Well, let's assume that the grapefruit is made up of only nitrogen atoms, which isn't at all true, but there are nitrogen atoms in a grapefruit. Well, to help you visualize this, let's blow up each of the atoms to the size of a blueberry. And then how big would the grapefruit have to be? It would have to be the same size of, well, actually, the Earth. That's crazy. You mean to say that if I filled the Earth with blueberries, I would have the same number of nitrogen atoms as a grapefruit? That's right.
Okay, so blow your kid's mind with a video like this. Does it teach them the atomic structure and all the other stuff? No. That's what the part you fill in. But I use this video. We're about to go into the atom, and this is going to be my do now activity. And I'm going to give this, it's a 4-minute video created by Ted. That's John Bergman, by the way. He's one of the flip class people. And he wrote this whole thing up. It's a lesson he gives. And Ted turned it into an animated video. And they have all sorts of them on their website. You can use it for the Constitution, or could there be aliens in other planets? I mean, it covers all sorts of different topics. But this is a great video. It's 4 minutes long. It's animation, so it keeps the kids' attention like that. And it's short, and it gives them something. And then my do now question is, how small is the atom? And I let them tell me what they got out of this video. And we can talk about it. But in reality, and it goes on, it goes on to something else. So if I filled a grapefruit, would have to be the size of the Earth if every nitrogen atom was a blueberry. Okay, that's great. So he goes on to talk about how small is the nucleus. And the nucleus, to put this in perspective, and this is the part that I talk about with the kids, the nucleus, if you were to blow the blueberry up to the size of a professional sports stadium, the nucleus would be a marble sitting on the 50-yard line, and the electrons would be in the upper nosebleed seats up with the lights. That's how small the nucleus is compared to the overall atom. And here's the part that I make my kids really blow their minds. If you took out all of the empty space, which is actually what's between the electrons and the nucleus, if you took out all the empty space and all the atoms inside of a human being, the person could stand on the head of a pin. That's how small they'd be. That's how much empty space we're filled with. So, what a great way to start the class. I used a video to teach something about the kids. Will they always remember this? Yes. Why? Because they're picturing a grapefruit the size of the planet. And there's a whole bunch of out there, like donuts and there's coffee and a whole bunch of other things. But here's the other one. Okay, so that's a video that I picked. How about a video of something that they found on TV? So they're sitting down with their parents or whoever, or if you're like me who just loves Ellen DeGeneres. Ellen DeGeneres has on all the time this guy named Steve
What's
Spangler.
happening?
So this is a mixture that you can make at home. This is just cornstarch and water.
Okay.
And if you touch it like this, it feels like quicksand. Here, feel it. Right? So it's like quicksand.
Wow.
See?
That's
but if you punch
crazy.
it, it becomes a solid. So watch this. When you punch it, here, try punching it. See, it's a solid.
That's crazy.
But if you don't punch it, then it's a liquid, right?
So the kids see this on 4 o'clock television, and they're like, that's cool. Can we try that? Absolutely. Let's do a lab with it. And he goes on and he plays around with it, and that's a non-Newtonian. And the thing about Steve Spangler is he is a science guy, so he explains the science as he's going. Hold on a second.
All right, so now, this is where you come in. You're going to hold on to this.
No, I'm not.
Of
No.
all these times I've been on, this is a no, I'm not?
No, I'm not.
It's fine. I am.
All right.
All right, so watch this. So you turn it over like this, and you see there's a reaction going on in here.
Right.
No, it's fine. It's fine. And sometimes you'll see just a little fizzing going on, and sometimes you can hear it like a little bit of popping, but you can hear the fizzing kind of taking place inside. Sometimes it takes longer than others,
Yep.
but you'll see a little
Sometimes
pop.
it takes.
This is, yes. So this is where I see, it's like a time delay. So it's like a time reaction.
There's great chemistry going on there, and it's so simple. It's just Alka-Seltzer and water and some film canisters. The hardest part about this is finding the film canisters more than anything else, because no one has film canisters anymore. Darn the digital camera. So the kid watches this on TV and shows up to class and says, I got this video clip. I want to try this. Is that okay? And I'm like, well, where is it? Where does it fall? Well, it's a chemical reaction, so let's do it when we talk about chemical reactions. And now this kid is designing a lab for the entire class. He's going to write the procedure, he or she is going to write the procedure designed around something he saw on the Ellen DeGeneres show. Okay? So, and of course it goes on. Steve Spangler is awesome because he's like, well, if I can make a catch on, like if I can make this little thing explode, why can't I make this whole thing explode? Like he makes smoke rings. He's like, yeah, you can do it with a cup, or you can do it with a garbage can, or you can do it with a, and he just goes bigger and bolder. Okay, so here's a problem that we run into about the disconnect. We're creating a digital divide and between the haves and the have-nots. And believe it or not, it's there, but it's not. I have this weird situation this year where I had a parent come to me and said, my district is very weird. We have some very, very rich areas. Bon Jovi lives in our town, to put perspective. And we have some very, very, very poor areas. So I had a parent come up to me and said, my son is a fantastic athlete, which is why he's at your school, but we live in an area of Middletown that was hurt very hard by Sandy, and we don't have internet in our house. And I said, that's weird. So she's like, well, he can't really go on the website, and he can't get your videos, and he can't do it. I'm like, that's strange, because he has an iPhone, so he kind of has the internet all the time. And Mom's like, wait, what? And I'm like, he has an iPhone. It's a smartphone with an internet connection. He goes on it during class. Have you talked to him? And I'm like, yes. After Sandy, I saw this gigantic jump in cell phones amongst my students. Prior to Sandy, I had about 40% of my students who did not have a smartphone. After Christmas, after Sandy, I only had 2 students without smartphones out of 100. And none of them got computers, but they got smartphones. Because what happened was, Mom and Dad realized that a computer runs out of battery, and a computer cannot connect to the internet if the electricity is out. But a cell phone can still connect to the internet and still can communicate, and they can find out where their kids are at all times with a cell phone, but they can't do it with a computer. And so a lot of the parents, instead of investing in laptops for their kids, invested in smartphones for their families. And they got smartphones. And I'll make bet if you question what's going on in your classroom, you'll see a lot of things. Even my poor families went and got their kids smartphones instead of a family computer, because they can use the computer in school, but the internet connection is there for them all the time, and they don't even realize it. So yes, there are some areas that are extremely rural or extremely poor, and it's happening. But do you have libraries with computers? Yes, both in your school and outside of your school. Would you be willing to set up a rental facility? We did that. We took all of our old computers, all the ones we were replacing, and we put them into the library, and the kids can come in and borrow them like books. And they come in, they sign an agreement, they take out the computer, and the parent's responsible for the computer. It gives the kid an internet connection. It gives the kid the ability to do digital work outside of the classroom. There are always ways around it. And if you are still in the extreme case where you can't get the kids on a computer, I can guarantee those parents probably have a TV and a DVD player at home. And every one of these videos that you create can be burned to a DVD and can be sent home with the kid or on a flash drive or something. There's always a way around every solution. Okay, that we always give. This is people always give to me. This one is one of the toughest ones, because here's the biggest criticism of this. And I just love, this was a picture I stole from someone. They got it from that museum, but that website. But I really like this for a reason, because it shows that teacher-centered classroom. But the thing about this, they say, well, if you are a lecturer, the videos are just lectures. Yeah, they are. There are ways to make YouTube videos non-lecture based. Yes, it's an instructional video. Did you know you can embed questions into a YouTube video? Did you know you can embed hotspots in a YouTube video? So as the video is playing, you can click on a spot inside of the video and it jumps to another website. Did you know that you can make the YouTube video pause and ask the kids quiz questions, which are then emailed, the responses are then emailed to you or stored in a Google Doc? Yes, those are all possible things with YouTube videos. So you can do more than just lecture. Here's what the flipped classroom does. The flipped classroom enhances whatever you are. If you are a bad teacher, it enhances bad teaching. If you are a good teacher, it enhances good teaching, is really how it works. And I run into a lot of people who are like, I tried it and it failed. I'm like, okay, why? And then they tell me that what they did was they found a worksheet and they found a video, and they made their kids watch this video that they did not create, that was taught by some college professor at some university, and then they took a worksheet and they gave the kids a worksheet in class, and they said, here, do the worksheet. And I said, well, what were you doing while this whole process was going on? And they're like, well, I had all these tests to grade, so I was grading. I'm like, okay, so all it did was create a worse teacher in the classroom. You did not get better by doing it. And I had a lot of students, people have talked to me over the years and said, oh yeah, my teacher does it this way and there's no way. Because we get students who come to these conferences too, and they tell me these things that their teacher used flipped classroom, and I'm like, explain. And it's Flip 101, but like remedial. So it kind of makes it worse. Okay. You've seen this. This is the Bloom's taxonomy pyramid. The new Bloom's taxonomy pyramid, with creating being the top portion of the pyramid. Our philosophy, flipped classroom teacher philosophy, is the pyramid should look like this. Where your lowest level of Bloom's, you're spending the least amount of time on. My students watch videos. Yes, no question. They do it with the most lowest level boring garbage that I don't need to take up their time with. And my kids spend the majority of class applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating their own assignments. And I have them, do that. I have them go out and find labs to create. I have them do inquiry-based assignments, and I'll show you a picture of that in a second. I have them doing the top 2/3 of that as much as possible. The remembering and the understanding is non-existent, the remembering is non-existent in my class. I teach chemistry. How many of you, when you took chemistry, had to memorize the periodic table? Okay. How many of you, this is the best question, how many of you, after you memorized the periodic table and took a quiz on it, were then given a periodic table on all later assessments? Why? Why? Like, when you first learned how to drive, and you had to memorize which one was the gas and which one's the brake, because you all did it. You're like, right gas, left brake, right gas, left brake. And you went over it. How many of you then labeled the gas and the brake in your car for the rest of time? How many of you, my grandmother, wonderful woman, I love her a lot, but she didn't learn how to drive until she was in her 50s. She just never needed to. She drove exactly twice in her entire lifetime. The second time she drove, the first time she drove, she had a massive problem remembering which side was the gas and the brake. So the second time when she had to drive by herself, we actually labeled her shoes so that she could, because with the first time we realized that we labeled the gas and the brake and then she put her foot over the top of the label, she couldn't figure out which one was which. Now, logic would dictate when you step on one and the car goes and you step on the other and the car doesn't, like she would have figured out, but we actually labeled the front of her shoes so that she could look down while she was driving and figure this whole thing out. But my point is, we don't do that stuff. Like, if you use it, you remember it. So my classroom has 0 memorization. And my colleagues are like, what? You have to make them memorize the periodic table. I'm like, why? My kids know the elements. What's the symbol for oxygen? When was the last time you used the periodic table? You can't even remember. You just know it. And my kids start to do that. And they're all like, no, I'm going to have to make index cards. I'm like, okay, you try that. And then they don't. And then they still learn it. And they're like, wait, if the tool is in front of them, why do they have to memorize what's on the tool? Like, it doesn't make any sense. You don't label a hammer with smack nails with this. You know it, you figure it out. And it sounds like a ridiculous statement, but it's an absolute truth. Carpenters don't have their tools labeled. You know, they know what they're used for because they use it so often. So, okay, good. I'm in a good spot. So, here's we go. Here is what the flipped classroom should be. And this is what schools should be in general. Is a focus on learning and not grades. So if it needs to be standards-based grading. Do I do standards-based grading? Little bit. It's very, very, very difficult. As much as they have books and stuff to make it look good, it's a very hard process to go through. It's a very hard sell for parents. I am more on the problem-based learning, the student-driven assignments, and most importantly, the guided inquiry. This picture includes Garrett and Andrew from last year. So let me explain what this picture is. I do a lab involving baking soda and vinegar. I do it 3 times. It's the exact same lab 3 times. And I use it for 3 different purposes. The first time is when we talk about chemical reactions. Physical versus chemical changes to prove what a chemical change is. The second time I do it, we talk about what's called stoichiometry. So how much stuff do you put in and calculating how much stuff you got out of it. And the last time I do it with gas laws. So how much stuff did you put in and how much gas did you get out of it? And the kids have to do the lab and do the calculations to verify their results. So you can see the setup that was taken down in the background. What the kids have is they have 6 test tubes. Each test tube has the exact same amount of vinegar, but a varying amount of baking soda. And they put balloons on the top of each of them. So they end up with 6 test tubes with 6 different sized balloons all over it, so they see the connection between the 2. So because my class runs asynchronously, not every group is doing the lab on every day, doing the lab at the same time. I sometimes have 3 or 4 labs that are going at a time. I might have 2 different or 3 different versions of a lab going. So there's a lot of stuff happening in my classroom all the time. It's very hard to manage. It takes a lot of practice managing it. So I'm working with one group off to the left here. And I turn around and I hear giggling. And when you hear giggling in a chemistry lab, that's really, really bad. So it's sort of like when you have little children at home and you hear silence. You're like, wait, why is it so quiet? And you start to freak out. So I hear giggling. And I see the kids spooning baking soda into a balloon, like mad. And now that's not an easy task, by the way, because you have to like stretch the balloon and dump it in there. So they're just like scoop, scoop, scoop. And they only need like 5 grams, which is like the end of a spoon. And it's like scoop after scoop after scoop. I'm like, what the heck do you think you're doing? And they're like, we want to see how big we can get the balloon. We wanted to see if we could make the balloon pop. And I said, itty bitty test tube, whole ton of baking soda, ain't going to work. And they said, well, how big of a test tube do you have? And I said, now this is a weird coincidence. A week before, I opened a drawer and found this test tube. I inherited the classroom, so I didn't know what was in there all the time. So I found this test tube, and this test tube sits this big. I have no idea why you need a test tube that is that large. So I happen to have this test tube, and I said, I have this. And they're like, cool. And I'm like, no. Prove to me that you can do the calculations based on how much baking soda you just put in there. I said, because I only have 5 gallons of vinegar with me. I don't want you just dumping vinegar in there and like willy-nilly here, we'll make a huge mess. I said, you calculate how much vinegar, using the density of vinegar, using the volume, and using all the mass, and based on your mass of baking soda, how much vinegar you need to add to the baking soda that you just added to that balloon, which means they had to take all the baking soda out of the balloon to figure out what it was, to see if the whole thing will fit in the test tube. They're like, we're on it. And I held the test tube as a goal. Like I held onto it so they couldn't steal it from me. And they did it like here, and they have a whole whiteboard filled with calculations. And I'm like, okay, this is really good. This looks pretty good. And I'm like, so I knew who was, this is a group of 3, and the mathematically oriented kid did all the calculations. So of course I went to Garrett and Andrew, and I said, how did he do this? And they're like, oh man. So they had to go back, and he had to explain the whole thing to them. I'm like, I got it. I'm like, they're like, you're tricky. I'm like, yeah, I'm deviant. I'm like, I'm evil. So finally they did the whole thing. I handed them the test tube. They put the balloon on the top, and it gets that big. And I said, you want to see the face of an engaged learner? That's what the face looks like. Because that kid was like, holy crap. Now, they're all like, yeah, it's going to pop, it's going to pop, it's going to pop, it's going to pop. It never popped. That's the best thing about balloons. Like, they have to get really big to pop. They didn't even bother to they didn't think that the balloon would get huge. They wanted this thing to just go boom and explode, and it never got there. So it was just an amazing experience, but this was driven by the kids. This was kids fooling around in the chemistry lab that turned into an amazing educational experience for all of them. And I talked to Andrew and Garrett, and they're like, oh my God, Seigel, do you remember when we pulled out that huge test tube and we got the balloon this big? Yes, they are never going to forget that experience, and they learned how to do that chemistry really, really well because of that. And I let this group do it. Other groups are like, we want to do it too. I'm like, nope, because all you're going to do is copy what they did. And I want you to produce something new. And so I do this kind of thing all the time. I have another lab, another great story. It shows you how kids think sometimes. I do a lab with thermochemistry where the kids have to design their own lab procedure. Pure guided inquiry. I give them the objective, I give them the materials, and they have to write their own lab procedure. Very, very difficult to do with kids who have been given nothing but cookie cutter labs for their entire science career. I had 2 girls come to me and said, Mr. Seigel, we have been trying this for a week. We cannot write our own lab procedure. I'm like, okay, so what do you want to do about this? We want to do something different. We want to test the effectiveness of different coffee cups and how well they insulate. Like we want to take a Starbucks cup, a Dunkin' Donuts cup, and one of like the thermoses. And we want to see how well each one insulates hot water. I'm like, okay, that sounds pretty good. It's all thermochemistry. It's related to the topic. I said, well, where are you going to get the procedure? We're going to write it ourselves. Okay. Now, these are 2 girls who literally 15 minutes before said, we can't write our own lab procedure. We can't do it, Mr. Seigel. And they're on the verge of tears, and they just told me they're going to write their whole lab procedure. Now, they have no background. They have no objective. They have no materials. All of things I gave them, they're going to start from scratch with a blank document. Man, was it awesome. And the 2 girls were so engaged during the entire time, and they learned in the process something that I never expected to teach them, which was heat capacity, which is different devices pull heat in different orders. So believe it or not, if you're going to drink your coffee fast, the worst thing to drink is from a Dunkin' Donuts cup. Because Dunkin' Donuts cups have what happens is they hold their heat very quickly. Basically, the heat goes like this and then drops. So if you get a Dunkin' Donuts cup and you want to drink your coffee fast, get it in a thermos, because thermos loses heat very quickly, but then stabilizes for a really long period of time. But Dunkin' Donuts cups, they keep their heat for and then they drop drastically. That's why your coffee cup, you'll be drinking, you put it off to the side for like 3 minutes, and all of a sudden it's cold, because that's what you've heat the capacity of the heating device. The girls learn this themselves through this whole process. I knew this. I took chemistry in college. But I knew this was going to happen. But they're like, but this is weird, Seigel. The Dunkin' Donuts is up here, and the other two are like this. We thought the thermos would be the best one. And I'm like, yeah, but if you notice that once that temperature got there, it never changed. It stayed constant all the way through. So when you're going home, when you go tomorrow, when you go to get your Dunkin' Donuts, or Monday, bring your reusable thermos, fill it up at Dunkin' Donuts, leave it in your car, don't drink it until you get to work, and it'll be at just the right temperature for you. So, okay. Here's my thing about this. All of this is great, but if you continue to do what you've always done, you're going to get what you always got. I love Tony Robbins. He's that really like 6'9". He's huge. He's gigantic. The guy is gigantic. But he's a motivational speaker. And the thing about the flipped classroom is you have to change your mindset. If you continue to do what you did before, if you continue to use the old worksheets and the old lectures and the old labs and the old everything, and the only thing you did was call your room a flipped classroom and put instruction on videos, you're never going to get anywhere. You're going to be in the exact same place that you were previously. Okay, and you can't do this alone. I used to call myself an island because very much I was that guy. Like that guy, one of my colleagues called me that crazy Seigel guy. When talking to one of my students, said, oh, you have that crazy Seigel guy for chemistry, exact words. And I'm like, I'm cool with that. I'm good with that designation. So I used to be an island. Now, and I've discovered that Twitter and the Flip Learning Network and the Ning and everything, getting out to conferences is the way that I have to collaborate. It's how I grow my ideas. And the unfortunate part is all of our budgets were slashed, and we can't send anyone out of district anymore because there's no money to send anyone there. But that's the beauty of Twitter. Twitter and online is we have to give teachers the time to talk to each other and the time to get online and learn new things. I collaborate with my students a lot. It sounds bizarre, but my students help design my class. They don't like something, I throw it out and I start with something new. They want to go in a different direction, as long as it's within the curriculum, we go down that different direction. So that collaboration is happening all the time, and I talk to my colleagues. Now, since most of you are administrators, here we go. I am like the best and worst nightmares of an administrator because I do a lot of great stuff and I make my administrators look really, really good. And at the same time, they're like, oh my God, I can't handle you anymore. So, because I'm always asking for more things. You need to give your teachers time, like I said, to collaborate and to develop new activities. You can't throw 10,000 things on them. I know you have things that are state mandated, but here's a great suggestion. And I don't know how many of you do it, and if you do it, I applaud you. Is every once in a while, surprise your teacher and knock on their door and go, hi, I'm here to teach your class for the day. Go collaborate with your colleagues and just give them some time off. Or set up a sub and bring 2 of your teachers together and say, I've got subs for both of your classes for half day. Here, you're going to go into a room and you're going to build something great. And I just want to see what you get when you come out of it. You got to give them resources. You got to make them have connections. You have to model it. My administration, I love them. They're fantastic guys. But they keep telling innovation, innovation, innovation. Use Google Docs, use Google Docs. And then they email me Word documents. And I'm like, oh my gosh. We're a Google Apps for Education district and you're putting your memos in Word documents. Put it in a Google Doc. Model it. Flip PD is becoming very popular. You know the professional development that you're going through, that they have to go through. Make a 5-minute instructional video on it and have them watch it and then come to the meeting prepared to collaborate and discuss. That's a big one. This is my thing, Dare to Fail, up there. Dare to Fail. I have it on my classroom. It is my Twitter. That's where Dare to Chem comes from. It comes from the Dare to Fail model. And it's the idea that if we don't fail, we're never going to learn anything. We're never going to get better, or we're never going to do anything different than we were doing before. So I push my students to give me something that they never gave before. This is why my administrator hates me. Because he shows up with his little form, and then he walks out 80 minutes later going, oh, crap. Because he's got nothing on the form. He's like, I can't fill anything in. Because when the student runs the classroom, what do you put down for effectiveness of the teacher? For the teacher's lesson. The teacher didn't instruct anything. This is Christina. She's one of my AP students this year. This was honors last year. My honors kids last year were like world class. I love them. But when the kids come to me and then they don't take notes during the entire period of instruction, and then they pull up their phones at the end and they take pictures, but they're engaged in the lesson the whole time, what do you do on the observation form? Like, how do you write down what the students were doing? Or when you take your administrator outside in the middle of November to demonstrate solution making and non-Newtonian fluids, which was what Steve Spangler was doing in the little bowl with the cornstarch and water. So we took 150 pounds of cornstarch and 300 pounds of water and mixed it in the kiddie pool, and I had the kids dancing on it and mixing it with their feet. Like, that is science right there. And I didn't tell him he was going to be doing this when he got here. I said, but he likes to drop in. And I'm like, I told you not to drop in on me. So he's out there with his iPad going, for 80 minutes going, this is awesome, I can't write anything down. And I'm like, why don't you take some pictures and just show the picture as the observation? Because this is just a fantastic experience for these kids, and they will never forget dancing in cornstarch. The best part about this is it took me so long to get them to stand still that by that time, cornstarch, by the way, is like quicksand. You sink down into it, and then when you go to pull up, the force of you pulling makes the whole thing solid. So they all got stuck. And they're all like, trying to get out, and the whole kiddie pool is jumping up and down. 500 pounds of cornstarch and water, and it's jumping physically in the air as they're all like, ready, 1, 2, 3, and they're trying to jump at one, and the whole kiddie pool is jumping up and down. But I had kids doing handstands on the stuff and gymnastics off of it. That is education. So, okay, so I threw up a whole bunch of stuff. I know this page is in the PowerPoint that I gave to Vinny, and that's in your book, but I've got a second page which is not on there. So here's the big thing, Twitter. That's my big one. If you're not on Twitter, if you don't have your teachers on Twitter, they're missing out. You need to get them involved as much as possible. My life has changed drastically. I can talk all day about how my life is so much more awesome because of Twitter and the friends that I've made on Twitter. Kristen Daniels, who's phenomenal, runs a Flip PD website. She is a learning coach in Minnesota. She runs an entire, very large district, and she does all the e-learning for their district for K-12. She handles all that stuff. If you don't know Jerry Bloomgardner's website, which is Cybraryman, which is, I believe, is cybraryman.com, Jerry is a retired New York City English teacher and librarian. He has a website with over 20,000 links organized by everything. You name it. We actually spent half an hour attempting to stump Jerry on Twitter, and we're throwing out the most random things. I think the only things we couldn't find on his website was like kayaks and Italian cooking that doesn't involve basil. Was the only things that were on there. Okay? Otherwise, he's got it. You got elementary school teachers and they want a theme, he's got them. He's got some, and it's all organized by different things, technology and grade levels and subject matter, and it's phenomenal. He's retired in Florida right now, but he's wonderful. And then this is the website, this is the page I know is not on there. So, Flip Learning, the Ning is online. I believe it's fliplearning.com, fliplearning.org, it's both of them. Every year, they're starting to do a flipped classroom open house, so different teachers will post that they will open up their classroom to observers on a given day. That day happens to be Digital Learning Day, which I believe is February 5th this year, but I'm not positive, in 2014. The Flipped Classroom Conference is in June. It's being held in Pittsburgh this year, so it's driving distance to New York. I don't remember the name of the school that it's at, some Mars something. But it's in Pittsburgh this year. It's bounced around Chicago, Minnesota, now it's in Pittsburgh. And then I also wanted to tell you about that a book just came out, and not that I'm that much of a self-promoter or anything like, but I brought some magazines. If you want to grab a magazine, those are free. But and that back table back there. I also brought copies of the brand new book. It is available on Amazon for like $27, but today and today only, I'm selling it for $20. Well, an in-house special. But for $20, I take cash credit and charge and all that stuff. So anyway, so if you want to talk to me. What's that? Yeah, that's right. But yes, and not that I'm trying to promote, the reason I'm promoting it is because I'm one of 13 authors for it, so I want to make sure that it's out there. It has resources covering everything from elementary to science, from high schools, to technology, administrative stuff. It has a little bit of chapters written by a whole bunch of different people all over the place. You can, like I said, you can also find it on Amazon. And I want to mention also that Pillars of Flipped Learning, they actually do an online webinar where you can pay for 25 of your teachers to go through, I think it's like a 3-month course or a 4-month course, all run online, all based around remodeling your classroom to the Flip Learning. It's on fliplearning.org, and you can find a link on there. You'll see that column Greek pillar thing up there. Okay, questions? Really? I covered everything? Yes, sir. Yeah, there's a couple of elementary teachers that I have that are on the Flip Learning Ning that are doing flipping, and what they're doing is they're not using instructional videos to do it. They are giving the kids, how did I describe it? They're taking what they would do as enrichment in the classroom, and they're sending it home, and they're doing more hands-on activities with the kids in the class. So all that time when you do science and you want to do like the kids building things in the classroom, but there's not enough time because of the curriculum, they do the reinforcement of the instruction. They give the kids as the worksheets of what they would have taken. They take it home, and then when the kids come in, their activities are there's a table with a pile of activity, with a pile of stuff, and it goes back to more of like a preschool or a Montessori model of education, which is here are the stuff you're going to learn by doing aspect to it. So it gets the kids more hands-on and involved. There are some things that they still do traditional, like basic instruction in math or things they have to know because of state standards in history, because you have to know like things about your state or things about the country. There's stuff like that, but they try to bring in wherever they can the hands-on and push the instructional stuff to home and let the kids do reading and writing, and they bring it all in. They do much more projects. There's some great, on the fliplearning.com, people have posted pictures of what they do in their classroom, and you can see it there. Any other questions? Yes. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, everybody.